Our international RIMPAC campaign, Cancel RIMPAC campaign launch. My name is Katie. I'm with the International Women's Alliance. Thanks to everyone who has introduced yourselves in the chat. Please continue to do so and let us know where you're joining from. We have a very exciting program tonight where we'll go over some political situation and really dive deeper into how RIMPAC is part of the overall US military strategy globally. And yeah, really just get to know better how we're going to be launching and carrying out this campaign in the coming months. Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce our conveners to start. So we can go to the next slide. But like I said, I'm with the International Women's Alliance. We are a global alliance of grassroots women's organizations. We were founded in 2010 and have a pretty major global campaign that focuses on women opposing war. Many of our members unite that war and militarism are the #1 causes of violence against women globally, and that women are part and parcel to the overall anti-war movement. And so really just uniting our members all across the world to better educate and mobilize women to oppose US war and create a new world together. I'll go ahead and pass it to Carly from Resist to talk about that alliance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carly, and we're really excited to kick off this international Cancel RIMPAC campaign. I'm part of the Resist US-led war movement, and we are an international anti-war network that is fighting to resist all wars of aggression and build just peace. We have campaigns against transnational weapons companies and war profiteers and the states that are engaged in imperialist wars all around the world. We view war not just as countries fighting each other, but including sanctions, food blockades, policing, military sales, weapons deals, and military alliances, and many more things. So we're excited to confront a war games example here that'll start off in San Diego and take off all the way to Hawaii. I will pass it to Bayan.
Hi, magandang hapon or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pixie Castillo. I'm the Mass Campaigns Officer of Bayan USA and the chairperson of Gabriela USA. Bayan USA is an alliance of grassroots anti-imperialist Filipino organizations representing migrant workers, women, youth, and students, among others. We aim to arouse, organize, and mobilize Filipinos for national democracy in the Philippines. It is the first and largest international chapter of Bayan Philippines. And some folks might have seen some of the things we're working on. Currently, the president of the Philippines, Marcos, is coming to town for a trilateral summit with Kishida and Biden. And so we have some actions that we'll announce at the end of the meeting. But I'm glad to be with you all today.
Yeah, thanks, Pix and Carly. The 3 alliances that you just heard from, we'll talk about a little bit more in terms of what our role is in the campaign later. But from here, we'll go ahead and pass it to Cody and Misty to walk us through the political situation. Thanks, y'all.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Misty, and I am with Endorse Hawaii. And we are here to do the political situation surrounding RIMPAC and why we are all gathered here today. I do have Cody with me, and he'll be talking in a bit. But before we begin, I do want to just give a big shout out to Joy Enomoto and the folks at Hawaii Peace and Justice for providing a lot of the information that we'll be sharing here today in terms of the situation in Hawaii right now, including some photos and slides that they've shared with us too. Not only did they share super important information, but they did it really beautifully, and as you folks will see later. But as we begin, I just wanted to share this hashtag. If anyone here has ever been on the Twitter or the X of the Indo Pacific Command, or the Indo Pacific Command. This is a hashtag that they like to use like in all of their posts and even in their bio. That hashtag free and open Indo Pacific. And so it really begs the question, what does a free Indo Pacific look like? And for the US military, these are the words that they use most often: military readiness, reinforcement of interoperability, and the strengthening of relationships. But I think it's safe to assume from the folks who are gathered here today that this is not what a free and open Indo-Pacific looks like for us, or even what it looks like in reality. Because in reality, free and open Indo-Pacific for them is insecurity for the people that where there are military bases or where there are their campaigns to pursue like trade routes or to protect trade routes. And so one thing to note here as well is that these darker like colored countries, those are all under the area of responsibility of the Indo-PACOM. And so we can see here like countries like China, India, Australia. It's like a really wide range of countries, and it literally covers like billions of people. And so their headquarters are here in Hawaii, and this is where they have their headquarters based at. Next slide, please. And so yeah, so as mentioned earlier, when they talk about military readiness and what a free and open Indo-Pacific is, our version of, or the reality is that military readiness promotes global insecurity. It helps perpetuate violence. It helps to ensure the exploitation of people on the ground, and especially in terms of like the environment. So this really sets the precedence for the US military to continue building their military industrial complex and training other countries to oppress their own people through their genocidal tactics, as we've seen in like many countries, especially in the current situation happening in Gaza, in the Philippines, and in a bunch of areas. And so even the idea of like interoperability goes back to their practice of using their allies or their allied countries to stand on the front lines and basically fight their wars for them and protect their trade routes for them to benefit from. And so from here, I'm going to pass the floor to Cody, who will be talking about some of the different strategies that they use.
Right on. Thank you, Misty. Hi, everyone. My name is Cody. I'm an organizer also with Resist US-Led War Movement, usually based in Portland, but I'm currently calling in from the Chicago watch party from the campaign. So shout out to all the comrades on the other side of the building over here. So to kind of take it off where Misty was starting us, to really understand the US Indo-Pacific strategy, we have to look at these lines, these very specific lines that they draw on the map here. This is what is known as the island chain strategy of the US. What this means is they literally, like you see, draw this line between this first island chain that is coming from South Korea through the bottom of Japan, going through the Ryukyu arc of islands, and from the south, from Singapore, up the coast of Malaysia on Borneo there, going up the central to the northwestern part of the Philippines. And both these lines come right in the middle of a very key area, and that is Taiwan. The second island chain kind of goes up or on the back end here, and it goes through US-occupied Guam, also known as Guam. This is where how the US plans its strategy for this region. And I'll tell you in a minute what it looks like. Before I do, y'all should know there's actually a third island chain way off to the right there, and that's where Hawaii comes in. And currently they're trying to build two other island chains, one that's on the other side of the Indian Ocean and the other that's over the course of Africa. There's a whole scheme that the US is trying to do here. And if you want to know what this looks like, jump to the next slide. This means a series of missile silos, of military ports, of all these ways to push, see those arrows going towards China. Jump to the next slide. It'll show us a bit more of a zoom in what this looks like. And you'll see that this is warships, it is missiles, it is US bases all along these countries here. Jump to the next slide. We can see a bit of a zoom in what this looks like. These are all the areas on the left of Japan that have US military bases. Over 50% of those are just on the island of Okinawa, which is here on the right. There is Okinawa is the island that is most covered by US military personnel than anywhere else in the world. And they're starting to move them even further south, closer to Taiwan. Jump to the next slide. You'll see also what this island chain strategy looks like. Bases covering South Korea. Singapore, right here at the bottom. The whole areas of this island are covered in the US air and naval bases here. Thailand, which isn't even part of the island chain, is covered in US military bases. Up to the upper right is the island of Diego Garcia. This is a small island off the coast of India where its entire indigenous population was driven off the land for a British and then US military base, and not a single person whose family lived on this island has ever been allowed to come back. That is the price that US militarism plays on these islands, is driving people off their land, sometimes forever. Jump to the next slide. We can see what this looks like in Australia and New Zealand. Again, just covered with bases, including the largest drone base in the world in Pine Gap, right there in the middle of Australia. These aren't all just Australia, New Zealand bases. They're also US bases here too. But a country we really want to focus on for this case study, if you jump to the next slide, is the Philippines. So what does this island chain strategy mean for a country like the Philippines? Here on the left is where all of the bases that the US is allowed to use are scattered across the country. And this is because of something called EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. If you jump to the next slide, real quick history, there's a lot deeper history to this, but what you have to know about the US military presence in the Philippines is that it was one of the most militarized countries by the US in the region until the people kicked them out. That's right. In the early 90s, the Filipino people organized a mass movement that actually ejected the US military bases. What EDCA is it's part of a strategy that the Philippine government and the ruling class that runs it use to say, well, there's still Philippine bases here, but the United States can come and just stay here and use them for enhanced cooperation between our militaries. And this has led to the point where, if you jump to the next slide, just last year, under EDCA, the Philippine government has allowed the US to come and use access to 9 additional bases. And if you jump one more slide, there's something that was later shown that if you actually see all of the areas that the US is allowed access to, it's not 9 new facilities. It's 16 new facilities that the US is allowed to use in the Philippines. Indo Pacific Command, that the strategy it's pushing is remilitarizing in a much more intensive form US military presence in the Philippines. But we also have to remember why they're using all these laws to make this happen. It's because they know that the Filipino people united and pushed them out. And that's what we have to remember for this campaign to cancel RIMPAC, is that it is possible to demilitarize because it is possible to fight back and win against military presence. If you jump to the next slide, before I hand it back to Misty, let's look at what this looks like in other parts of the Pacific, including Guam, or also known as Guam, which has is getting some of the biggest missile silos in the whole region put on it right now. And then, of course, there is US-occupied Hawaii, which you can see all of the bases that are scattered on this map here, as well as this big one of Oahu alone, which is the most militarized part of the islands. And to talk, I'm gonna pass it back to Misty.
Thank you, Cody. Yeah, so now we'll be getting into what RIMPAC really is. So RIMPAC, or the Rim of the Pacific exercises, was created in 1971. That's when it first started by the US, Australia, and Canada as a response to the Cold War that was happening at the time. And so, as you folks can or as you folks had seen earlier, like in terms of like the first and the second island chains and all of the overseas bases that the military has. And like we said earlier, they use them as like the front lines for their wars and for protecting their trade routes. And so it's a way for them to strengthen the position that they have and like put themselves like literally at the door of Russia and China during that time, and even until now. So the exercises themselves, they span from San Diego to Hawaii to the Hawaiian Islands. And it used to be an annual exercise, but by like 1974, they had made it biennial or every 2 years because it was getting too big, as they're saying. So until now, it holds most of its original purpose to control the trade routes in the region and to show US military dominance in the Pacific against China in particular. So we can see here all the flags of the 26 countries that will be participating in RIMPAC this year. They usually call on two particular groups, one of them being the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which includes Australia, US, India, and Japan. And then there's also the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, or ASEAN, which includes Thailand, Vietnam, Brunei, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and including some of the other island countries that you can see the flags here. You have like Tonga, and then one that we could see clearly there too is the Israeli flag. And so they're also a participant of RIMPAC. And yeah, so just for reference too, during the 2022 RIMPAC exercises, a total of 38 warships, 3 submarines, and more than 30 unmanned systems, including 4 unmanned Navy surface vessels, were used. So there's a lot of ships and weapons being moved around during this time. And so, if we could go to the next slide, before we talk about what actually happens at RIMPAC, we're going to show you guys this video of highlights that the Navy released from 2022's War Games. Get ready to rock.
I think you might be muted.
Oh, I think the video dropped.
Yeah, the video dropped for a sec. It's probably just a connectivity issue.
Okay. I'm not seeing the screen. Okay, there you go. So I think I could see in the chat, it is a pretty disgusting commercial. Even Zoom did not want to see it. So yeah, one thing or two things, and we'll go to it later too, is we could see them using missiles to blow up decommissioned ships. They also used, I always forget the name of the machine itself, but those that come from the water, like they're tanks that come from the water onto the beach. And I've seen someone mention in the chat too about that being at Bellows, and that was at Bellows, and we'll talk about it a little bit later too. But just the amount of military force that they're trying to display here, it's a really yeah, it's just really sad to see. But they try to put on this like whatever kind of music and make it seem like it's super cool. But anyways, so if we could go to the next slide. I don't know if it might just be me, but
Sorry, getting the slides back up.
Okay, no worries, no worries. While we're waiting for that, they have a lot of these kind of videos on their YouTube page, and I think they also post them on their Twitter, where they post all these different photos about like as mentioned earlier, like the free and open Indo Pacific. So you cannot find them all on YouTube. And that's one way that the Department of Defense does in order to also take accountability off themselves. Like, oh, we're doing all these like cool things, but in reality, everything that happened in that video is a very clear sign of the way that they're able to desecrate not just like the environment, but like greatly affect the lives of the people who are there. And if you go to their website too, you can see they have like a little section or a little like hyperlink to it's like it says the environment, and then it will lead you to this page talking about, oh, we're the stewards of the sea, we protect the sea, we do all of these things to make sure that all the animals in the sea are protected when we're doing these games. And it's just super ironic that when you try to look at the video that they say they use to do like visual detection of marine mammals, the video is private. So it's like it really is just like reflective of the fact that they don't really do anything to protect the marine and wildlife, not just in the ocean, but even on land. So yeah, we could see in the video just some of the things that they do. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that one of the bigger activities that they do is called SyncX. So they shoot missiles at decommissioned ships. And they do this at their Pacific Missile Range facility, which is just a super big expanse of land and ocean located in Kauai, where they just have this huge area to perform these war games, basically. And as a result, there's definitely like different effects to the environment. But since then, there hasn't been an adequate environmental impact study done to actually see what those effects are. But for sure, there's the leaching of heavy metals, leaching of different chemicals into the ocean when they fire these missiles at boats, and when they and even just the force of the explosion itself is enough to kill wildlife and marine mammals in the area and destroy even the coral of the marine environment. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, another one we saw in the video was their amphibious assaults. As someone had mentioned earlier, Bells Beach is usually where they perform this. And it is also historically a turtle nesting ground, which for the longest time has been devastated by these activities. And because like when that tank like comes up from the water, it displaces so much sand, and just like the general activity happening there, it's incredibly difficult for turtles to be able to nest there. So when COVID happened in 2020, and they weren't able to perform this exercise, that was actually the first time in decades where the turtles were able to nest. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then another way is like the DoD has faced numerous like lawsuits over the years for their effects, and even like the impact of sonar on marine mammals. But yet they also use them to locate and mark mines. So that's what they do to like train dolphins and monk seals. Yes, liberate the dolphins. But yeah, and then this is a photo of they call it a leg squad support system, and this is, I believe, in Kahuku, where they or even in like other areas too, also in Kauai at the same Pacific Missile Range facility, where they physically remove birds such as the Nenedemoli or the Lysan albatross from their nesting grounds. And so they physically remove the birds from the area during their live fire exercises. And then they even go through a process called the egg canceling, where the eggs are like taken from their mothers and they're placed in an incubator, and then they're moved to the North Shore. And so that also changes like the migration pattern of these birds, and it just affects the way that they're able to be in their natural environment. Yeah, and then one reason that they do this too is because they their priority is not for the wildlife, but their priority is like all the machinery that they use. And so if a bird like strikes an engine, it could be like millions of dollars to replace the engine, but of course they're gonna put the engine first against like the different wildlife in the area. Okay, and then sorry, yeah, I'll make it quick. And then another one at the Pakuloa training area, which is on the Big Island or Hawaii Island. There have been a lot of cases of increased risk of fire and even like fires happening, which destroyed wildlife habitats, desecrated sacred Hawaiian sites, and as like with the missiles earlier, this leached a bunch of different chemicals and heavy metals into the mountain. And then next, and then furthermore, even when it comes to like the people, as we know, like with militarism, also comes increased rates of gendered violence. One example is like since 2017, the number of women and girls in conflict-ridden areas had surged by 50%. During RIMPAC, we could see in the photos here where like these are like clubs where they have like signs that say welcome RIMPAC because they know that during this time they're going to be super busy with all like the soldiers and the army people and the Marines coming in and being a part of their business. Yeah, and then as mentioned earlier, they do also test a lot of different weapons. This one in particular was from the Task Force Guahan, otherwise known as Guam. One of the weapons that they test to is like the Tamir Iron Dome missile, which is also used by the IOF in Gaza to kill Palestinian people. And so everything is pretty much super connected in the way that the military tests and does these war games here to use it for their genocidal tactics in other places of the world. Next slide, please. Yeah. And so another reason why the military builds these bases, especially in terms of Hawaii, is to serve as a fielding station within the Pacific. And it was really one of the reasons why the Hawaiian Kingdom was illegally overthrown, to serve this purpose and to protect American trade interests. So Pu'uloa, or as it's called like by the military, Pearl Harbor, is still the largest fueling station in the Pacific. About 8.5 billion gallons of fuel are used annually, and just during RIMPAC, 1.5 million gallons of jet fuel are used within the span of a week. So that's a ton of fuel. Next, please. Yeah, so just that severe amount of fuel, there's bound to be, especially with the structures that they've built, there's bound to be fuel leaks, and that happened over the course of their entire like occupation on the islands. But more recently, in 2021, there was a really big jet fuel leak that happened, and it poisoned the freshwater supply for over like 93,000 people. And that is another success, that there was a large like mass campaign to shut down Red Hill, and it was it was a success in that they were able to shut it down. But now we're in the stage where it's super important that we remain vigilant, that they're actually doing their job of cleaning and making the water safe again, basically. They even owe the Board of Water Supply $1.2 billion for recovery costs because as we were even in a discussion the other day where, in order to actually like get the water clean for people to use, you would have to replace the entire piping system. And that goes to show too that with this jet fuel, like they removed it from here, but they also brought it to like the Philippines, for example, or moved it to different parts of the island. So the problem of militarism and, them being the biggest polluters on the planet is still there. But they just like to make it seem as if, they're doing something when in reality, they're just doing it somewhere else. And then, yeah, this is just a short slide of like the business of weapons. You can see just the billions of dollars that are being used to buy all of these different weapons and missiles for them to practice with. And it really begs the question too, is like, if we were to put this amount of money into social services and things that would actually benefit the people, how different all of this could look. We go to the next slide, please. And then this is just another overview of the budget. Just for weapons, they had about $315 billion allocated to that. And then, yeah, they even had like a 40% increase from last year for what they call like the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which is used for air basing, missile warning, construction, and then like funding for defense of Guam and Hawaii. The reality is just to increase the militarism in these areas as well. And then next slide, please. And then, yeah, like as I said earlier, like just imagine like all of that billions of dollars going to actual services or economies that are for the people. You can see here that the state of Hawaii's dependence on the term that has been coined was militarism, where the real source of like everything that's going on is the military, but they kind of create the facade of tourism to hide everything that they're doing and to create a economy that is super dependent on outside forces coming in. But in reality, it's not very sustainable, both for the environment and for the people to have this kind of economy. So yeah. And then I will pass it back to Cody, who will share about the situation in San Diego.
All right. Thank you, Misty. If there's one word that you've got for RIMPAC now, how you feel about that, put that word in the chat and let's see how people are feeling. And by the way, I'm gonna probably keep my video off for a bit. I was told I was a little choppy before, so hopefully this helps. But anyway, we've heard a lot about what RIMPAC is, thanks to Misty. We've heard about the impacts this has on US-occupied Hawaii. And we also talked about what the overall strategy is that RIMPAC fits into. This is part of this US Indo Pacific strategy to militarize Asia and the Pacific and to build up to a world war with China and other countries just to line the profits of some rich assholes in DC and all over the US and all over the place. So how does San Diego play into this? It turns out, as you see on this slide, San Diego is a US military playground. It is one of the most militarized areas on mainland North America. If you look at the percentage of land that the military owns within the city limits. So what are some of these bases here? If you jump to the next slide, you see this massive one up here north. This is Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. Jump down to the next one and next slide, and you see scattered throughout the bottom Naval Base San Diego. If you jump to again, you have along the peninsula here, Naval Base Coronado, and one more time, Naval Base Point Loma. And I wish we had more time to really get into all of the details about these bases and the ways that each of these bases devastates the people in San Diego. I will say that I got this info from a really incredible education piece that organizers down in San Diego made. And hopefully throughout the course of this campaign, we can learn a bit more about the details of these bases. But if you jump to the next slide, just take a little overview. If you look at satellite photos from these bases, it is massive. Just look at the military base up in the upper right-hand corner. All of those docks is a dock for a battleship. It's a dock that a US aircraft carrier could line up with. That is how much military hardware San Diego is designed to hold. And why we are planning our national convergence of this campaign around San Diego is because all of the ships from those 20 plus countries that come to Hawaii, they come for these devastating war games. The US ships start their journey in San Diego. The US ships start in San Diego at all these bases you see here, and they all sail off after a big send-off party to do everything that Misty just talked about. That's why we're having this campaign, and that's why we're working with folks down in San Diego and in folks in Hawaii and all over the world to throw down, to cancel RIMPAC. Next slide real quick. Well, along with what Misty was saying about the impacts of RIMPAC in Hawaii on the land and the people, it's similarly to San Diego. Toxic pollution from the bases. There's been PFAs found in drinking water. All those ships that are burnt and destroyed, the fumes come into areas around schools, around churches, and it stays in the air for years. Mental and emotional health impacts on military personnel and their families. Some of the highest rates of family separation and domestic abuse of military families. The highest rate of active member suicides in the state of California are here in San Diego. State neglect of their families. These bases have well below basic living standards. There's been mold found in them, no fire safety. There's been tons of sewage backups in the barracks. And there's scant healthcare staffing for active service and veterans and their families. And they're also from 2022 to 2023, there was a 17% increase in houseless veterans in the area. So the U.S. says, sir, so if you're not supporting the war, you're not supporting the troops. The last people who are supporting military personnel is the U.S. government itself, not just by the wars that we're waging that are getting them killed, but in the way that they are completely neglecting them and using them as cannon fodder in these wars for profit around the world. And of course, there's a very predatory focus on youth recruitment in the poor and working class communities. And in fact, in Lincoln and Kearney high schools in the San Diego area, students were automatically enrolled in JROTC. That's the Joint Rear Officers, or sorry, the Junior Rear Officers Training Corps. So parents had to opt their students out of getting their students trained into the military in high school. That is just how predatory the military recruitment is amongst youth in San Diego. And of course, massive cases of sexual assault against women, but also against youth. 267 sexual assault cases reported last year at San Diego Navy bases. 253 at the Marine Corps bases. Sorry, this is 2016, but the numbers have just kept going. And then sex offenders, when they're charged on the bases, they're just released into the community openly, and they stay in San Diego. And so there's actually, it says about 6 sex offenders per year ends up staying in San Diego for long term. And there's also a massive trafficking ring of minors, mostly poor and BIPOC youth, many as young as 14 years old, who are preyed upon by the military. So this is the impact in San Diego alone of being one of the most militarized areas in the United States. And before we finish, let's also talk about what else happens at San Diego that plays into RIMPAC. If you jump to the next slide, we'll see a brief slide here on NAVWAR. That is the Naval Information Warfare Systems Command. This is the center of almost all Navy research in the United States. Drones, AI. There's currently a top secret project being researched here called Project Overmatch, I believe, or it might be Overwatch. If you know if it's Overmatch or Overwatch, put it in the chat. But it is actually developing a whole new doctrine of US-led war. Back in the day, the US used to follow a doctrine called land-air war. This is actually a doctrine they took from the Israeli military. It means send in the planes and bomb the shit out of everyone, and then send in the tanks and ground troops and take care of everyone else as fast as you can. The US saw Israel doing this to Palestine and neighboring countries back in the 70s, and they've used this ever since. But since then, since the pivot to Asia and the Pacific, a new kind of military doctrine the US chose called air, land, sea, which involved all of the naval warfare you just saw in the slide here. What NAVWAR is researching for the Navy, this new top secret project, is part of a brand new military doctrine called Joint All-Domain Command and Control. It is involving cyber warfare it's involving space warfare. All domains that they call them domains are being used in warfare. And the main research for it is happening right here at NavWar, and it's being rolled out in testing exercises, which the next slide, like this one at Trident Warrior, and this is where they test these new doctrines and new technology and then put it out in the world. And that means that because this is happening in San Diego, and because RIMPAC and other exercises like Trident Warrior here play such a strong role in testing these new theories of warfare, that puts RIMPAC kind of at the center of how the US is trying and will probably fail, fortunately, at remaining the #1 military superpower in the world. Are we going to let them do that? Tell me what you think in the chat. Real quick, to finish up my last slide before we go on with the campaign, here's an example of what this looks like, how RIMPAC is actually a testing ground for these weapons. Up on the upper left corner was this news headline says, US Navy more certain of role of medium surface drones, pretty much drone boats, following tests. Those tests were at RIMPAC 2022. Drone battleships were tested at last RIMPAC. And then the next headline, they were sent into the field to the Gulf, Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf to spy in Iran. They were then tested further on the next headline by sending them all the way to Japan. Remember, the Japanese prime minister is in DC now with President Marcos and President Biden trying to sign more deals that will bring more technology to the country. And finally, what happens after all of these technologies are tested at RIMPAC and put out into the wilds? They are picked up by other companies. This other drone boat in the lower right is an Elbit drone boat. That is an Israeli company that they're probably sending that along the shore along Gaza right now. This is how the chain of events through RIMPAC happens, that these weapons companies test their weapons of war and send them out to other militaries. So for all these reasons, jump to the next slide. This is why we are uniting with organizations and people in US-occupied Hawaii to cancel RIMPAC. And if you're with us to do this campaign, then I'm going to pass it to my other comrades to tell us how we're going to do this.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Thanks, Misty. We are here to cancel RIMPAC. It was able to happen in 2020. We're here to build with comrades all over the world in all the countries that participate in RIMPAC, with the people in those countries to put pressure, to target all the parts of this war machine, and do what we can to build a fighting campaign against it. So we're going to get into the how. We're going to get into an introduction to what this campaign can look like. We're calling on everyone here, all over 200 people that are here just to unite on the direction of this campaign, to get involved, to take up this work, to bring it into our local communities, onto our campuses, into our workplaces, and to really build a broad movement to strengthen ourselves, to strengthen the people, to fight against RIMPAC. So we'll start off here with what are the objectives of this campaign? How do we design it? For one, we really know that we're going to need a movement. We're going to need to broaden. We're going to need to bring in more people, put thousands of people on the streets. So we want to strengthen solidarity, especially anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-militarism, women and people's national movements to fight together for sovereignty and independence, including the places where we already know there's movements against RIMPAC, like Hawaii and the Philippines, that are part of this campaign already, and we want to broaden that even further. Second, we want to strengthen anti-war and anti-militarism movement in solidarity, specifically in Hawaii, in San Diego, and in the countries where RIMPAC is involved, are sending those militaries. So with that people's pressure, that's where we can really strike a blow to war games like RIMPAC. Next, we want to conduct political education. We want to raise awareness of the US buildup to war in Asia, right? Because we know that RIMPAC is just one piece. These exercises don't stop at exercises, but they move into new military alliances, they move into new weapon sales, they move into new bases, more occupation of the land and water in the Asia Pacific. So we need to expose that. We need to provide and build up education from all the experience of everyone on this call about how militarism and war are used to crush people's resistance, and how this bloated US military budget deprives people who've been displaced by war and militarism, like overseas Filipino workers and all people in the US, especially the working class, of their basic livelihood. Because we know that all this money that's spent on war and occupation is not going into our schools, our hospitals, our communities, and in fact is being used exactly in the opposite direction. Next, we want to mobilize, we want to get in the streets, we want to plan tactics to disrupt pro-RIMPAC activities and the conduct of RIMPAC itself, based on how strong we can build our campaign up to a peak in San Diego. Additionally, we want to support the call to isolate Israel. Israel's participating in RIMPAC, even though it has nothing to do with the Pacific, but as a proxy of US imperialism. We want to expose how RIMPAC itself contributes to the genocidal war and occupation of Palestine. And we want to block that participation. So that will be one of the calls in this year's Cancel RIMPAC campaign. Finally, we want to expose local demands of movements in RIMPAC countries against their government's participation. So we're calling this an international campaign, and we're already reaching out to comrades around the world, to other movements who have in the past waged their own fights to remove their government's participation. And we'd like to link all those together to build an international struggle against RIMPAC. And then we also want to expose the role of US bases and its impacts on workers and peasant communities in the Philippines. We're excited to partner with Bayan and other Filipino organizations in the power of their anti-militarism movements. We want to understand the lessons from actually kicking off the US bases in the past and build that solidarity with their struggle. So who are the targets? Who are we directing all of these objectives? Sorry, who are we directing our fight against? We want to draw out a few of these targets. First off, the presentation earlier talked about it, but we want to target the US military Indo Pacific Command. This is based in Hawaii. This is a combatant command. And you can see here, the US has divided up the entire world under its military commands. Right here in Washington State, where I'm calling in from, we have security assistance forces based at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Those are under the Indo Pacific Command that go and train other militaries in other countries to turn against their own people. So we want to target this command and isolate it, expose it for what it is. Next up are the RIMPAC member states themselves. Here's a list of some of the countries that have participated in RIMPAC in the past. And part of our work is to build up movements and connect with people and movements in other countries that can target these governments, while we strengthen as much as we possibly can our campaign here inside the United States and the belly of the beast against these military exercises. And then we'd be remiss not to mention the transnational weapons corporations that are contracted to build the very systems that are tested in RIMPAC. We just shut down in Seattle a defense supplier summit of the Boeing Corporation in Seattle a few weeks ago, where they're trying to network, they're trying to strengthen their supply chains. But so many people have mentioned in the chat already that there are these war profiteers on your campuses, that they are recruiting from the youth, that they're also exploiting their own workers, that these corporations are profiting in the billions off of the genocide in Palestine, off of this buildup to war in the Pacific. And whenever the US and other countries that they sell their weapons to invade, start wars, they get richer. So we want to target the weapons corporations if those are in our communities. And these can be many of the different points of contact that we have with the war machine, where we can wage actions, we can mobilize our people to build up the fight and lead up to this confrontation against RIMPAC, because all of these are component parts of what it takes to build up military exercises like RIMPAC. So these are our targets. If you're excited to target one of these in your own community, if you can already think about who you might be able to target as part of this campaign, feel free to throw that in the chat. And we'll start thinking about how we can link up our different campaigns on the ground to really build a strong network of campaigns as part of the Cancel RIMPAC campaign. So these are our targets. These are our enemies. These are who we want to put our weight against. But what will we use to call the people into action? For us, some of the initial calls that we'd like to put forward for the campaign are cancel RIMPAC, ban Israel, no cooperation with genocide, US out of the Asia Pacific, US out of the Philippines, resist imperialist wars, shut down CANSEC, one of the largest weapons expos in Canada, and end the arms trade, no support for reactionary regimes, and one of the US's strongest military alliances, no to NATO, which will also be meeting in Washington, D.C. this July. These are our calls. These are the things that we want to use to mobilize people into action. While at the same time, we can particularize, we can drill down these demands so that they make the most sense for our context where we're organizing, where we can make demands on a specific target. So money for jobs and education, not for war and occupation, no US bases in the Philippines, no US bases in the world. And then we can target specifically these institutions in our communities. We can call the cut ties with weapons companies, and we can name who those companies are. When we're mobilizing inside our own areas, we can target local government. We can call to withdraw that country or that local area's participation from the RIMPAC exercises. And we're excited to work with our comrades in San Diego to call on that city as well, refuse to host RIMPAC. Yeah, we can see all these targets. We've got people from Milwaukee, we've got people from San Diego, we've got people from California, we've got people in LA, we've got people from Seattle, and I know there's people targeting all of these weapons companies, governments, and military institutions that all want to cancel RIMPAC together. We talked about this earlier, but this is just the start of the campaign. The International Women's Alliance, Buy in USA, and the Resist US-led War movement have come together to kickstart the campaign, to convene over 200 people just to start. But we're really excited to grow this number and to bring people in to fight together. So here's our proposal for how to do that. We'd like to form a steering committee that can give leadership to tactical decisions of the campaign, unite on calls and demands, that can see how the local campaigns build up together, that can expose war and guide based on the objectives of the campaign, and then help oversee subcommittees where we'll have a chance to plug in today. And then we'd like to create 2 levels of support for the campaign that your organizations can join, can choose to be part of. First of all, and this might be the higher level, is you can be an endorsing organization. This means you can join the campaign, you can get very involved, your organization can help carry it out, you can join planning meetings, join subcommittees, and really throw your organization's weight behind the campaign. So that's the endorsement. And we'll list out and collect as many endorsing orgs as possible. And then the next tier, so if you will, the next level of commitment would be to become a supporting org. Maybe you can't be so involved in the campaign, but you would like to show your org support. So this is where we'll list out as many supporting orgs as possible. And the commitment here is to spread the word, mobilize your community, and we'll list all those orgs as part of the campaign as well. And then, of course, there's going to be different work needed to get to this confrontation. These are going to be some of the subcommittees that we'd like to propose that will be under the steering comm. These are some of the tasks, but of course, we'd love to build off of your creativity as well and see what else we can do. So just a few of the committees so you can get thinking which one you might like to join. One is outreach. This team will communicate with members, send invitations, outreach to a broad number of orgs, track these orgs, make sure we're in contact with them, organize new people into the campaign, follow up with sponsors and endorsers. Then we'll have an education comm that can plan out, build up educational events, conduct research, create shareable educational materials, translate materials, etc. We'll have a prop comm that will create social media and print agitprop or information, create campaign website, create videos, graphics, and written prop to expose RIMPAC. This team is similar, but we're hoping to separate it out from the next comm, which will be media. And this team will try and get media attention on the campaign, on print, on radio, TV, to get press landings, op-eds, prepare media strategy and spokespeople. We know we can really expose RIMPAC and put eyes on these war games. Next up will be fundraising. That'll create resources for grassroots fundraising, oversee campaigns, budget, apply for grants, raise the resources needed to get folks down to San Diego and put on the activities there. We're also going to have a peak conference. This will be a political and educational conference hosted in San Diego. The goal here is really to bring people together to educate each other, to learn from each other, and really project our analysis and build analysis together. So this comm will create programs, speakers, logistics, organize volunteers, registration for the conference. So if that's something you're excited about, please plug in there. And then finally, the mass mobilization. We need folks to think about how tactically we can mobilize against RIMPAC. So this committee will help us think about how to plan a disruption and mass mobilization targeting the RIMPAC activities in San Diego this summer. So that's really the how. We'd like to invite people to be a part of these campaign comms. And then what are we all trying to do together? We really want to see a campaign that has US and global political education, prop, and actions building up to a peak educational and political conference and mass mobilization in San Diego with all these components that we just talked about. A campaign that grows, that people can join, education with topics like what is the US military strategy, who's who in RIMPAC, how does the military and the economy connect to each other, what are the environmental impacts, how does RIMPAC impede sovereignty and how are people resisting, what are the particular impacts of militarism on women. And so we'd like to have an educational series that folks plug into to really raise our consciousness and not let the military pull the wool over our eyes. And then this will build up to a peak in San Diego. We hope to see build-up actions in as many cities as possible. We can use those to draw in people to get organized and prepared for the peak action, which will happen in San Diego right before coinciding with the start of RIMPAC is our target. We don't have a particular date set quite yet. We're still doing some research and gathering info, but we hope to launch that mobilization towards the beginning, and then also support however the Cancel RIMPAC actions are being waged in Hawaii during RIMPAC as well. So to keep up our support and keep speaking up. So this will be some of the pieces of our campaign design. And yeah, then in terms of the flow of the next few months, for the last couple of months, some of us have been hard at work designing a campaign paper, thinking about how to organize ourselves, getting united and prepared for this launch. Here we are now at the launch where we want to start up our campaign committees, start to put out the word, start conducting political education, set plans. And then for the build up, we have the next 2 to 3 months to build up. And this means, reaching out as far as we can, getting people involved in the campaign committees, sharing our prop, building up art and prop, conducting political education. And we can even target intermediary targets like the CanSec Expo that's happening in Canada in May. Folks can correct me if I'm wrong. And then folks in San Diego are already setting up actions against this exponential drone conference that's coming up to test unmanned aerial vehicles, just like the ones that are being used to bomb and identify targets in Palestine, in the Philippines, at the border, right, all over the world. And that brings us to our peak. We'll set a date in late June, early July for our mass conference, Mobilizations Against RIMPAC in San Diego and Support Actions in Hawaii. And then we'll wrap it up. We'll assess together. We'll see how we can broaden the movement even more beyond that. And yeah, close out our campaign. So that's sort of where we're hoping to engage everyone on this call. We hope you'll join us for these efforts. So yeah, folks can already decide if you'd like to endorse or support the campaign. There'll be more opportunities to do that. This is one of the ways where you can plug in. So everyone, if you have an interest and you are united that we should cancel RIMPAC, that you want to see this military exercises, build up to war in Asia and around the world shut down, then we invite you to join us to cancel RIMPAC and build a movement for just and lasting peace. So I think with that, I'll pass it over to Pix to get us into discussions. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Carly, and thanks everyone for all of the chat happening, agitational chat. Everyone's ready to go. And so we're gonna take time now to actually break out into breakouts based on the committees that folks are interested in joining. In the chat, we also, thanks Patrick, put in the URL, the tinyurl.com/cancel RIMPAC support. This is also another way to make sure that we have your info, and if folks are interested in joining, you'll see that it also has a way for organizations to also express their support there, just to make sure that, yeah, we don't miss anyone. But we're going to ask folks based on the different committees, if you are interested in outreach, education, prop, media, fundraising, peak conference, or mass mobilization, go ahead and you'll put the number in front of your name. So you're going to go to the participants panel, find yourself in the list, and then you're going to click down more and then rename. And then after your rename, you're going to put the number based on your preference. And then, yeah, if there are any questions, we can definitely ask those in the breakout rooms. We'll give folks a second to change your name. And then I'll explain what our objectives are for the breakout rooms. And so we would want everyone to be able to do quick intros, whether that's via chat, and then agree on a communications platform. Our recommendation is creating a Signal text group. You could also choose to form an email group so that we can be able to just have a way for the folks interested in this committee to be able to communicate. And so that is really the minimum for the breakout groups. If there is time, we want folks to set up and try and set a first meeting so that we can further talk about how we're going to develop out the campaign, develop out the committees. And then also gathering any questions that folks have, especially anything that, we want to ask to, ask the steering committee, questions about the campaign, questions about the breakout rooms. And so, before folks go, thanks again, Carly, for putting in the chat again. Especially, I think, for folks in watch parties. If your watch party is going to be all going to one committee, but maybe you're interested in joining another, you can also put that interest down in the tiny URL / cancel RIMPAC support. It's a CryptPad form. And so trying to make sure that folks' info is as secure as possible. So I'm just going to scroll to see if folks have been able to rename themselves. It looks good. For folks, still wondering and figuring out, you still have the option to choose which breakout you're going to go into. And so we'll open the breakout groups now, and folks can choose based on the number. It will correspond to the room that you should be going into. If I can get support with that, opening up the rooms. Cool. And so we'll give folks a few minutes to get settled in the rooms, and also if folks are still debating on which room to go to. For adding a number, you can just add it to your name. And then for folks still in the main room, you can choose to, you can go into a breakout room by going into more and then clicking the breakout rooms and choosing which. We'll also try and sort folks who've already numbered themselves too.
Hello, sorry, I got kicked out of my breakout room. I was in breakout room 7. If someone can help me put me back in.
Yeah, we can move you there.
Thank you.
And then folks still in the room, you can go ahead and either stay in the room, or you can you should be able to move into one of the breakout rooms on your own.
Hi, Kira, I can assign you to room 2, the education committee.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Having technical difficulties.
No worries. Anybody else need support with joining a breakout room?
And the destruction to the land, the environment, and lives of people that are going to be most impacted. And even Israel, right, participating in these exercises as if the complete obliteration and genocide of the Palestinian people isn't already enough. So just want to give deep appreciation and thanks for all of the information shared about the impacts that RIMPAC will have on the people. We have a couple of announcements for folks as reminders. Tomorrow, there's going to be a National Day of Action to oppose Marcos, who will be visiting Washington, D.C. In a trilateral summit between the Philippines, the United States, and Japan. The National Day of Action is being called for by Bayan USA, the Malaya Movement USA, the Tuloy Ang Laban Coalition, which is a coalition developed by all those that are opposing Marcos and his regime, and also iChirp US. Marcos Jr. will be joined by Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister in Washington, D.C. to discuss their plans for so-called climate cooperation and peace and security in the Indo Pacific region. But we know the truth, right? We know why he's really going. And so if folks are interested, there are going to be actions happening around the US. In Washington, D.C., it'll be 3 p.m. Eastern at Farragut Square. And then echo actions around the US in Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, and Honolulu. And if you're based in any of these locations, please go and check out their actions. And then we have on April 17th, an educational teach-in being hosted by Bayan USA called Bangon at Lumaban, US and China out of the Philippines, and it's an anti-militarism teach-in. So please go ahead and check that out to learn more about the role that the US and China have in terms of really trying to infringe on the sovereignty of the Filipino people. We don't have a slide for this, but I did want to mention also kind of in the midst of us opposing RIMPAC, there's also going to be the NATO summit that will be hosted in Washington, D.C. this July. Many different anti-war organizations, other grassroots organizations in D.C., and the ILPS Mid-Atlantic chapter, and many others will be organizing different teach-ins, political conferences, and protests against NATO. So more to come as the details are being finalized. But in closing, we need all of your support to get this campaign machinery moving. Carly explained very clearly the objectives of this campaign, who the targets are, and also the sort of campaign structure that folks can join, right, to participate, whether you join the steering committee, the different subcommittees, or if you just want to show your support, right, by allowing your organization to show up on the campaign list and mobilizing your communities. So thank you all again. We hope to see you in San Diego, and if not, we'll see you out on the streets wherever you are in the world doing eco solidarity actions. So let's continue to build this anti-war movement and cancel RIMPAC. So I'll just end it with LFG, and we'll see you out there. Thank you all so much.